Alrighty, so let's finally go over how to do facial expressions on your VTuber model. Now, if you've seen the previous tutorials that I've done, I essentially went over two major subjects. The first one was going over all of the pertinent features of the program, if you've never used it before, as well as just the workflow of making a piece of art, cutting it up, or making it so it's already divided, and sticking it in and getting it tracked. The second one was a little bit more focused and was about dealing with the eyes in particular, because that's probably the part where you have the highest number of moving parts. And it's a little bit difficult to imagine a breakdown, especially since there's 3 or 4 different ways you can break down the picture. And facial expressions are a bit of a tough nut to crack when it comes to figuring it out and also kind of explaining things, because it's really one of those things that can turn into something very, very complicated quite quickly. But this is really the part where you would have all of these pieces on the pieces in place to become a VTuber. I'd like to first begin by taking a look at the parameters, because understanding these parameters thoroughly, as thoroughly as possible, is really the key to figure out how to add facial expressions. So here's this setup here is something I've already prepared ahead of time. But if I just go to this list here, now these are all of the parameters that is in this list here ahead of time for you. Like when you throw a Photoshop file in, all of these will be generated and named ahead of time. The program itself, if you're using the free version, you have 30 parameters, and here you have 27. The thing is, most of these are actually not useful for you if you're using Live 2D for the sake of being a VTuber, because only some of these will actually end up being properties that will be picked up by the face tracker. I've marked them all with an asterisk, but it's really just these. Everything else you can delete. Oh, well, yeah, you can use ankle Z as well. Body Z, you don't really use it that much. You need to do some extra rigging there. But most of, all of these ones that are circled are the ones that you'd want to keep. This final one, these final 4 are supplementary things that are related to physics and stuff, so you also keep those variables. But just look at this. Like, you have 8 parameters for the eyebrows, right? And you only use one of them. If your face tracker has issue tracking the left and right eyebrow, you would actually only use one. So you can probably delete these safely. And if you bring them in, and if you do need to bring them back, you can just make sure they have the right name. Now, out of all of these, to do your facial expressions, the ones that you would need to rig are the ones on these 3 parameters here, the ones with the word form in them. For everything else, you've probably already rigged them, because that's just a part of moving your head around, right? And they're also kind of self-explanatory. It's like, that's open and closed, that's X is just left and right, Y is just up and down. Form requires a little bit of interpretation, and once you do these 2, you've more or less just done your facial expressions. Like, those are all the basics. Sounds like a bit of a cop-out, because there's not much else, but at the bare minimum, you would end up rigging the eyebrow form and mouth form parameters already as part of your rigging process, and you can actually cover a lot of ground when you've rigged them. So I'm just going to rig them right now, as you can see, and for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to stick to like the right side rather than doing both left and right. Like, I'm just going to rig that on the right parameter as well. But for the form, it's a value that goes from -1 to 1. So you would want to do and a minimum of 3. So you just click the 3 keyform button by default. And for the highest value, it's essentially the eyebrow being raised up somehow. And let's do that for the left side as well. And when the form is negative, it's just your eyebrows being downward. And that's really it. So when you think of it in relation to your real life face, because this does need to, go to the face tracker, and the face tracker does need to go to your face. The way that your face tracker interprets it into form might be different depending on the shape of your physical face, but form, essentially is when you raise your eyebrows and when you scrunch them together, so that when it's downward like that. Mouth form is fairly similar in that, but well, that's open. Whoops. Yeah. So there's 3 values here, -1 to 1, and it's more or less the same. So one way of thinking of it is that positive is when you're smiling and negative is when you're frowning. But if you try to think of what your face looks like, another way of describing it, even though it's kind of weird sounding, is to say that positive is when your mouth is stretched out like that. So I will hold the Alt key to make it symmetrical. And then, you do a couple of adjustments to make sure it's not that deformed. And negative is just holding the Alt key. It's just when your mouth is kind of scrunched up. And there we go. I can exaggerate this a little bit more by choosing to rig the mouth flap here, because I did the mouth flap differently in this one. So if I really wanted to, I can just stretch things out a little bit more here. And if I just link those two dimensionally, and there we go. Mouth form and mouth open. Now it looks weird, but it will look good when it's in motion. Now, I forgot to mention this earlier, but this is a model that's just a remade model that I did ahead of time. It's the same cat from the original tutorial, but it has been cleaned up just so I can just hop straight to the face tracking and facial expressions immediately. I will try to make this available as a download for real this time. It's been properly cleaned up. It has grid lines for reference and everything. Yeah. If you don't want to draw a basic cat, you can just take this model and practice on that instead. Although, that is why I deliberately drew this in a simple way. Now, there is more to cover, because it does sound, it sounds kind of weird for me to say, oh, just rig the form parameters for your facial expressions and that's it, right? But first off, I guess I should try to explain why this is the case. Like, why is it really just rigging these two things? You have eyes, you have eyeballs, you have your mouth, and why is it really just 2 extra parameters? So if I just hide that. Now, if you try to break it down, a face, like if you think of like cartooning and stuff like that, and just what are the key elements of facial expression, a face really just consists of like eyebrows, eyes, and a mouth, right? And those are 3 different key parts of your face and that make up a facial expression. And if you draw, if you sort this into 3 different categories, right, of like you have eyebrows, you have eyes, and a mouth, and you draw all of the different variations of them, you can actually end up with a lot of combinations of faces with a very small amount. And with this, with eyebrows, you've made 3. Like you have a neutral eyebrow, you have an upwards eyebrow, and you also have a scrunched eyebrow. I probably should have made like a proper chart for this. Now here's one I totally prepared earlier, and I did not just cut the video like that. So if you think of all of the different shapes you can do with just 5 parameters, right? You have a neutral eyebrow, you have the eyebrow up and down, as with the eyebrows scrunched. And with the eyes, you have you probably rigged them to only open and close, right? So you have 2 keyforms that are one that's fully closed and one that's fully open. But you can also imagine your eyes as being kind of half open. And you can do a keyform for this if you want to be precise. For the eyeballs, you have 9 different directions that they can look at, and you've rigged them all. And it might just sound like something fundamental because it's like, oh, you're just looking around. But the direction that your eyes look is also something that contributes to a facial expression. Like if you're looking, like for example, if your eyes are kind of half closed and you're looking away, and you have the eyebrows up, but you're frowning, like that expression is different from the one where you're looking at the screen directly, right? Because it indicates that you're not willing to make eye contact. And it's the same for the mouth. It's a little bit more harder to say if a half open mouth is interesting or not, but that is an option there. And now you also have like a neutral mouth, a mouth that's smiling, and a mouth that's kind of frowning or scrunched up. And if you take all of this, like this is all stuff that you've mostly already rigged, right? If you take all of these numbers together and multiply them, like 3 times 3 times 9 times 3 times 3, you end up with really like hundreds and hundreds of potential combinations of facial expressions just from that. And I really do like encourage you to like just experiment with this. Like just start picking out different parts here and construct faces if you have trouble understanding what it takes to make a face. And you'll quickly realize that you don't actually need a lot more. Like that's kind of it. Like from rigging your face, you've already done your facial expressions. That's the twist, directed by M. Night Shyamalan, etc. That said, we are talking about a cartoon here, and you may want to do like eyes that are kind of like this, or a set of eyes that's kind of up like this, and these are kind of, and these are all these are both expressions that you may want to make. And there is a way to squeeze them in, right? So if I go back to these parameters that are included by default, there is a parameter here called eye smile, and that is meant to like if you're doing a live 2D for a video game or something like that, you could just use that parameter to have the eyes that go upward like that, go upward like that, right? But that's not really possible, and there is a trick to doing that which I use, and it's really requires a little bit of unintuitive thinking. Now I went through it really quickly, but when I was doing the mouth form, you'd see that I actually combined the mouth open and mouth form here in order to make the tongues and the open mouth stretch out as well. And this doesn't really work well because it's a cat mouth rather than a human mouth, so it's not really super visible. But like, it's really natural to imagine angle x and y and combining these two parameters together. But what you're really doing here is that you're just assigning two parameters onto a specific layer, and a side effect of it is that you do have these like additional phantom keyforms that you didn't actually put down, because it's actually a cross-section of two keyforms. That's how these two angles work, right? You only made, when you were making these keyforms for angle x and y, you actually only made 3 and 3. That's not 9, right? But the cross-section of these two created like a phantom keyform there that's only really visible if you use the link button here. And then you can actually set that form directly. Now the thing is, about these parameters, is that you can actually link any two parameters that you want, right? And like, there's no actual effect on the rig if you decide to reorder these parameters. Like, this is really just organizational. So I can put this up here, and so on. So what would you think would be possible if, instead of combining, say, the x and y or the mouth form, what if you combined, say, two parameters for your eyebrows and how your mouth is open? And from there, you can kind of slip in a few extra movements based on a combination of different movements that you'd make. And in the completed model here, you can actually see it because I've actually done all of them. So if I just go here, if I raise my eyebrows up and also open the mouth, you'd see that I made a secondary movement of the pupils shrinking. And I've actually added a few more in here, which I'll go through right now. I'll just show 3 of them which I've prepared for this demo model. And the first one is, of course, the one with a pupil shrink, and that one's fairly easy to figure out once I find the eyes in this hierarchy. Oh wait, I'm looking at the wrong file. Here's one I prepared earlier. Okay, so these eyes look a little bit weird, and that's because as an addition I made fully wide open eyes. So I can't really rig the eyes to shrink, strictly speaking. Where are the pupils? Where'd the pupils go? Oh, there we go. So I organized this. Okay. So because of that, you can see here that I've rigged these pupils to appear as part of the eyes opening. So I can't actually rig them directly. But the trick there is to just make an extra deformer, which I've already done. I've even named it ahead of time here. And it really is just a simple trick. You rig, you do the keyforms, you add 3 there, and you add 3 there, you combine them together, and you only rig one of the keyforms, right? And like, all of them are at neutral, but in order to squeeze this little one in, you just give this a little bit of a squeeze, just as an entirely separate deformer and set of parameters as well. And that really just keeps things independent. And that's really it, right? That's the entire thing. Now, if you want to isolate this even further, So let's just press undo that. If you want to isolate this even further, you're not actually limited to adding 3 keyforms on a parameter, and you can actually be a lot more precise here by pressing this button here, which I failed to point out originally. And it lets you just put values very precisely on the scale. There's even a snap feature here. So if you only want this to occur, say, only at the very peak instead of sliding upward, you can just add a keyform there to the form, as well as another keyform to the mouth open, and that limits things even further because it'll immediately snap back. And that's a very small zone. It's only 0.1 of movement, so it's going to be really snappy. Of course, for the eyes, let's just leave it like that. Let's not make it snappy. So, that's one of... Now, I also have an entirely separate set of eyes here, which you can't see because I've actually hidden. And it's actually these eyes that are kind of pressed together. And for this, you kind of have to imagine, this isn't a realistic expression, right? So you kind of have to imagine how you would actually do this on your face. And for this particular, squinty eye thing, that's not an actual thing your eyes can do, but it is something that's kind of a representation of your eyes being scrunched downward and your eyes being closed at the same time. So that means that if I were to combine the eye open and the brow form here, I can theoretically make this appear in the right place. So if I do that there, just add 3 by 3, and then I kind of pick a place to add a keyform. So if I want a keyform maybe around there, let's be a bit precise here. So in this case, all of them are low. So that's a very small zone again. And that's where the opacity, I actually did this backwards. So I need to remove all the keyforms. I need to set the opacity off by default, add them, add 1 by 1, there. And now I just raise the opacity up just for that one keyform again. And the inverse here, of course, is to actually make those squinty eyes disappear. So I actually have to rig the inverse of that. So right in this little corner here, I'm going to add an additional keyform right there. That makes these disappear. And the mouth is kind of independent of this expression. You can practice in front of a mirror or with your face tracker and stuff, I suppose, but this is this is something you can add to probably most of your characters, and it doesn't it's a way to add these expressions without using hotkeys or anything like that. The third one that I will do, which is not really done with a face or anything like that, but if I actually did the opposite here and had, instead of the eyes closed and the eyebrows up, I'll just have them all the way up here. So if I added, there's a lot of green dots there, isn't there? So if I added like another dot, right, maybe around halfway instead, because like I'm fine with it having it shift upward a bit. If I have it around there, it's really hard to see, but there is like a red, like there's a red dot, but then it's like a red circle around the green dot. So just for this little tiny zone, I will just raise these eyes up a little bit in order to make them point upward. Just to really emphasize like the smiling nature of the eyes. And this is the parameter I pointed out that was called eye smile, right? But you can't use that in a VTuber rig because it's not picked up. But like if you think of the surrounding movements, right, with your eyebrows and the fact that your eyes need to be closed, you can add this little extraneous movement here. And it's a really narrow area where you need to like kind of practice with your face track a bit and really force your eyes to be in that shape and have a more precise calibration. But that's really, you know, that's really how you do it. Let's just go there. So here's the model I prepared earlier and rigged earlier, right? And just with the way I move my face, I'm looking left and right. It's tracking my eyebrows. And if I kind of keep my eyes closed and scrunch my eyebrows, you can see the squinty eyes. Or you can see the eyes go upward. Or if I kind of stretched all of my face out, I can have my pupils shrink. And those three in particular, those three particular eye expressions, those aren't things that appear in realistic drawing. Those are really abstract representations of your eyes based on that simplification of, you know, like emphasizing only and only drawing your eyebrows, eyes, and mouth and kind of exaggerating in a way, because those, you know, those aren't real movements that your eyes can do. Those are things that are only showing up in those are things that only show up in cartoons that are meant to represent like things that kind of surrounds your face and kind of surrounds your eyes when they move and try to create that expression. So, you know, that squinty look is really a representation of you kind of scrunching up your cheeks and your eyebrows to really squint your eyes together to create those lines. And it's the same for, you know, your pupil shrinking. Like, your eyes can't actually shrink in real life, but you can, you know, stretch out your eyes. And, well, that usually happens when you stretch out your eyebrows and your mouth. It's an exaggeration. So those are three different places where you can squeeze in a few additional eye expressions. And I really, you know, there are probably a few more you can squeeze in if you use your imagination a little bit. Like if you use this list here and kind of just try to imagine, you know, unusual combinations you can make, you can squeeze in a few more if you really want to. But one thing that I wanted to like express at the beginning is that you didn't really need to, you know, like that does give additional flavor to your face, but you already have a very large combination of face parts here, and having a few more can and will help. But it's not really a deal breaker, you know, like I can add like a couple more mouth expressions here as well, like something that's kind of toothy, and that would be nice. But I think that's kind of enough for this tutorial to demonstrate the concept. This is definitely how I like to do it, to be honest, because it lets me avoid the complication of using hotkeys entirely. Worst comes to worst, you just make a brand new parameter, make something appear with a hotkey, and all of a sudden, you know, like, you don't need to use your face naturally. But that's not really something I wanted to like do for my Vtuber model, so that's not really something I focus on. Okay, so that should be everything, assuming I didn't skip anything with my notes. But hopefully, even though this was a very long delayed thing, hopefully you should have probably like everything you need to create a fully fledged Vtuber model. Everything else kind of requires your imagination. Like you understand the software now, hopefully, and what most of the buttons do, and all the boxes and stuff like that. You know, I've also covered like how to do eyes from different points of view, like different cutting methods and combining methods, because there are really multiple solutions to that. And there's also like going through these parameters and really looking at them a bit more deeply to have these facial expressions. And yeah, that's kind of it, I suppose. My throat is a little bit hoarse. Or should I say cat? My throat is a little bit cat. If you like this, do feel free to leave comments, and I do need to say subscribe and bell and something like that. Hopefully not a cat bell or anything. No, does that joke work? Nah, let's skip that joke. But yeah, I know these are a little bit far and few between, but I am always willing to give a little bit of help if you're having trouble. So do feel free to leave comments and feedback on what you think, you know, and share how you're doing with your own models. So bye bye, until next time.